On September 19, 1991, a married couple, Erica and Helmut Simon, were hiking up a snowy mountain pass in the Alps at an altitude of more than 3,000 meters. The day was clear, and they were following a familiar route along the border between Italy and Austria. But when the sun slightly melted the glacier, something strange appeared from under the ice. A human body, half protruding from the snowy mass. Their first thought was obvious: an accident, a dead mountaineer. The mountains do not forgive mistakes, but when the Simons came closer, certain details began to puzzle them. On the man's feet were leather shoes, skillfully stuffed with grass, clearly not from any modern store. Nearby lay an axe with a greenish metal blade covered in a strange patina. And the man's skin was dark and very wrinkled, but not decayed, more like mummified. The couple suddenly realized they had not found a victim of the modern mountains. They had awakened a man who had been sleeping in the ice for several thousand years. He was named Ötzi, the Iceman from the Alps, after the Ötztal Valley where he was discovered. Over more than 30 years of research, scientists have learned so much about him that history textbooks had to be rewritten several times. But the most important discovery was yet to come. Recently, scientists completely decoded his DNA using the most advanced technology, and what they found became a true sensation. It turned out that for an entire decade, we had been wrong about the most important thing. The real appearance of ancient Europeans was nothing like we had imagined, but more on that later. When helicopters with experts arrived at the site, radiocarbon analysis gave a staggering verdict. This man was 5,300 years old. The Copper Age, the time when people were only beginning to master metallurgy. To understand the scale of this ancient past, at that time Stonehenge was still a young structure, and the Great Pyramids of Giza existed only as distant plans. Ötzi turned out to be a man of about 45 years old. In those times, already a respectable age when most people did not live past 30. His height was just over 1.5 meters, his weight about 50 kilograms. By today's standards, short and slender, but his bones told the story of a man hardened by a harsh life in the mountains. The degree of preservation of the body was astonishing. The cold and dryness of the high mountain glacier had turned Ötzi into a natural mummy. Skin, muscles, internal organs, everything remained intact. Even the contents of his stomach could be analyzed. This gave a unique opportunity to study humanity's past with incredible precision. The very first findings already hinted that this man was unique. On his skin, scientists found 61 tattoos, not random patterns or decorations, but strictly functional marks, simple lines, crosses, and dots placed in very specific spots, the same areas where X-rays showed arthritis and other joint problems. This meant that 5,000 years ago, people were already practicing something similar to acupuncture, making marks on the skin at certain points to treat pain. Recent studies showed that the tattoos were made using a manual puncture method, a sharpened stick dipped in pigment. Each prick left a tiny drop of dye, and many such pricks created a line. For ancient people, tattoos were not a fashion accessory like today, but real medicine. And this was only the beginning, the first of many discoveries that would force us to rethink what we knew about the ancient world. Ötzi's clothing and gear told an equally fascinating story. His wardrobe was a true masterpiece of Copper Age technology. Leggings made from goat leather, a hat of bear fur, and killing a bear 5,000 years ago was no easy task. Over his fur clothing, he wore a cloak woven from long strips of dry grass, which provided extra protection against cold and moisture. But the footwear was the most impressive. An upper made of deerskin, soles of bear hide, and inside, a soft, grassy insole with a mesh-like structure. It was high-tech survival gear, with every element designed for enduring the harsh mountain environment. In 2024, archaeologist Eva Eisfeld was able to recreate exact copies of his clothing, using the same materials and techniques that were practiced in ancient times. The process turned out to be incredibly difficult. She had to find hides from the right animals, tan them with smoke, twist dry sinews into thread, and cut pieces with flint knives. Each item required several weeks of painstaking work. His gear was just as impressive, a flint knife with an ashwood handle. a long bow nearly 2 meters in length, though unfinished, which suggests he was in a hurry during the last days of his life. A deerskin quiver with 14 arrows, but only 2 were fully ready for use. Birch bark containers served as an ancient lighter. They carried glowing embers wrapped in fresh maple leaves. This allowed a fire to be started quickly anywhere. Pieces of birch fungus, tied to leather straps, acted as a natural first aid kit with antibiotic properties. But the star of the collection was the copper axe. For that time, it was a true luxury item, something like a modern sports car. The blade was made of almost pure copper, over 99%, and this is where the real mystery begins. Analysis of the metal revealed an amazing truth. The copper for the axe came from southern Tuscany, hundreds of kilometers away from where it was found. This meant that people of the Copper Age were part of trade networks that stretched across all of Europe. In those same Alps, archaeologists have found amber from the distant Baltic and obsidian from the Mediterranean. Ötzi did not live in an isolated world of primitive people, as we once imagined, but in a surprisingly connected civilization where goods and ideas traveled across the entire continent. But who exactly was he? And what was he doing high in the mountains at the moment of his death? Analysis of Ötzi's last meal lifted part of the veil on the mystery of his final days. In his stomach were the remains of 2 hearty meals eaten shortly before his death. Meat from Alpine ibex and red deer, along with grains of ancient einkorn. But the most striking detail was the incredibly high-fat content, almost half of his entire diet. Such a diet points to a man preparing for a serious challenge. Fat is the ideal fuel for the human body in high-altitude conditions, where the air is thin and the cold is relentless. Ötzi was clearly preparing for a long and dangerous journey through the mountains. Plant pollen found in his stomach told an even more precise story. It was extremely fresh. The plants had been gathered only a few hours before his death. But the most interesting detail, the first meal contained pollen from coniferous forests at mid-altitudes, while the second had pollen from alpine meadows. Ötzi had been climbing rapidly, moving quickly through different altitude zones. Was he on urgent business or fleeing from mortal danger? The condition of his equipment spoke clearly of tense, possibly final days. His arrows were broken and hastily repaired. His bow remained unfinished. And now we come to the darkest part of the story, his death. Forensic examination found signs of a violent struggle on his body, a deep wound on his left hand, the kind of defensive injury caused when trying to block a blow. Bruises on his ribs, signs of being beaten, and on his clothing and weapons, they found the blood of 4 different people. What could this mean? A mass fight? An attack? Revenge? In 2001, X-rays revealed another crucial detail. A 13mm arrowhead lodged between a rib and his left shoulder blade. The shaft had been broken off and removed, likely by the killer himself. For a long time, scientists were sure the arrow pierced his subclavian artery and Ötzi quickly bled to death. But recent research has cast doubt on this version. It turned out the arrow may not have completely torn the artery. The total blood loss was only about 100 milliliters. Painful, yes, but far from instantly fatal. It is possible that wounded and disoriented, Ötzi could not descend quickly from the pass and froze in the mountains. Hypothermia, a silent killer, brings confusion, weakness, and a slow fading away. In this case, it was not his enemy who finished him, but nature itself. Either way, Ötzi died a violent death high in the mountains, leaving us with a mystery we are still trying to solve today. But the biggest surprises awaited scientists when they began studying his DNA. In 2012, the first decoding of Ötzi's genome was published, and the results shocked the scientific world. The analysis indicated light skin, brown eyes, and, most sensational of all, traces of steppe nomads in his DNA. These nomads were warlike tribes from the Black Sea steppes who domesticated horses, invented the wheel, and are believed to have brought Indo-European languages, the ancestors of almost all modern European languages, into Europe. This meant that these tribes had reached Central Europe several centuries earlier than historians had thought. Ötzi instantly became a symbol of early migration. Museums created reconstructions of a light-skinned hunter with thick hair. Documentaries presented this image to the entire world. History textbooks began to be rewritten. But in science, one must always be prepared for surprises. By 2023, genetic analysis technology had made a real leap forward. Strict contamination protection protocols had been developed, and methods had become hundreds of times more accurate. A team from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology decided to re-examine Ötzi's genome from scratch. They took fresh bone tissue samples from the pelvic area, the part most protected from contamination. They used the most advanced sequencing methods. And when the results came in, the laboratory fell silent. "This is awful," said one of the researchers. "We've been misunderstanding this man for more than 10 years." There were no traces of steppe ancestry at all, not a drop. All previous conclusions had been the result of modern DNA contamination. Ötzi was not a carrier of Indo-European genes. The real picture was completely different. 92% of his genes came from Neolithic farmers of Anatolia, the ancient inhabitants of what is now Turkey, who, 8,000 years ago, were the first to bring farming, animal husbandry, and a settled lifestyle to Europe. Before their arrival, Europe was inhabited only by nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes. This was the highest concentration of Anatolian ancestry ever found among known Europeans of that period. Only 8% came from local hunter-gatherers. This means Ötzi was almost a pure descendant of those first Anatolian farmers whose ancestors came from Turkey, settled in the Alps, and lived there in complete isolation. And where do his closest modern relatives live? Not in Austria or Italy, as one might expect, but in Sardinia, a Mediterranean island hundreds of kilometers to the south. Sardinians are also descendants of those same Anatolian farmers and, like Ötzi's ancestors, lived in geographic isolation for a long time, avoiding mixing with other peoples. This means Ötzi represented an almost extinct branch of humanity, a genetic dead end that survived in the ice and reached us only by chance. But the biggest shock concerned his appearance. The analysis of 170 genetic markers showed that Ötzi had dark skin, much darker than most modern Europeans, brown eyes, and he was balding. This was written in his genes. All these years we imagined him as a light-skinned European with thick hair, but he looked completely different. His mummified appearance, as we see it today, turned out to be closer to reality than all artistic reconstructions. "It's amazing how much our ideas are distorted by our own prejudices," admitted one of the geneticists. This discovery forces a major rethink. Light skin in Europeans is a very recent development, only 4,000 to 5,000 years old. Before that, even early farmers were dark-skinned. The lightening of European skin happened much later, when people switched to a plant-based diet and began getting less vitamin D. In 2025, scientists went even further and analyzed the DNA of 47 other ancient inhabitants of the Alps, Ötzi's contemporaries and neighbors. The results revealed what society was like at the time. Men almost always stayed in their home village. This is evident from their similar paternal genes, passed from father to son. Women, however, moved from other places, marrying into the community and bringing new genes with them. This is how different settlements remain connected. But even among these neighbors, Ötzi stood out. His paternal line belonged to a rare genetic branch that archaeologists had found all over Europe, in Germany, France, and Spain, but almost never in the Alps. And his maternal line turned out to be truly unique. It has never been found in any other human on Earth, ancient or modern. The maternal line has never been identified, which may indicate its complete extinction, the scientists cautiously suggested. Was Ötzi the last of his kind, or a traveler from a distant community? New data shows that steppe nomads arrived in the Alps much later, in the Bronze Age. During Ötzi's lifetime, they were not there yet. At that time, the Alps were a kind of genetic reserve, where ancient lineages were preserved much longer than in the rest of Europe. The mountains shielded the locals from waves of migrants who mixed genes on the plains. But such isolation also had a dark side. Without an influx of fresh blood from elsewhere, harmful mutations accumulated in small communities, and hereditary diseases were passed down from generation to generation, becoming more concentrated over time. That is why genetic analysis revealed that Ötzi had a predisposition to numerous diseases, including obesity, diabetes, and heart problems. Fortunately, his active lifestyle prevented most of them from developing. The story of Ötzi's final days remains a mystery. Isotope analysis shows that he often moved between different altitudes, possibly practicing high-altitude herding. But what made him climb to the deadly pass on that fateful day? The blood of 4 different people found on his belongings points to a serious conflict. Perhaps he was involved in a skirmish in the valley and then went into the mountains to hide. His enemies caught up with him, wounded him with an arrow, but did not finish him off, assuming he would die on his own. And that is what happened. Ötzi froze to death alone, high in the mountains, becoming the last witness of a vanished world. Ötzi's body is a true time machine in human form. Every cell of his holds secrets from 5,000 years ago. The DNA of his gut bacteria can reveal which microbes lived in the bodies of our ancestors. Pollen trapped in his lungs can reconstruct the landscape of ancient vegetation. Parasites can show what diseases people of the Copper Age fought against and how developed their hygiene was. Ötzi forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. We often see in the past what we want to see. We thought we knew his face. It turned out we had invented it. We thought we understood his origins. It turned out we were projecting modern ideas onto ancient genes. Ötzi's story is a lesson in humility for science. It shows how dangerous it is to rush to conclusions and how important it is to be ready to reconsider even the most established theories. But it is also a remarkable window into a past where ancient Europe was a mosaic of peoples and cultures, many of which vanished without a trace. Who was he, really? The last of his tribe? A traveler from distant lands? A victim of an ancient conflict? His frozen body has given us many answers, but even more questions. And perhaps that is Ötzi's greatest value. He shows how much we still do not know about our past. The Iceman from the Alps continues to amaze, even 30 years after his discovery. Every technological breakthrough reveals something new. And who knows what other secrets his ancient DNA holds, and what truths about human history we will have to reconsider.